GDPR. Just saying the letters can bring on a cold sweat, right? We're talking about massive fines, up to 20 million euros, or even 4% of your global revenue. That'll get anyone's attention. But where do those fines really come from? What's the single biggest threat to your company's data security? Well, in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and find out.
All right, let's dive straight in. When you think about a data breach, you probably picture something out of a movie, right? Some sophisticated, malicious attack from a shadowy group of hackers. But the real story, well, it's a whole lot different. The biggest threat is actually much, much closer to home.
So I've got a question for you. What do you think is really behind most of these GDPR headaches? Is it some super sophisticated hacker in a dark room exploiting a complex security flaw? Or is it something a lot more ordinary? While all those stories about cybercriminals definitely grab the headlines, the honest-to-goodness reality is that most breaches don't kick off with some criminal mastermind. Nope, they start with a simple, totally accidental slip-up made by someone who's just trying to do their job. Over 80%. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is a staggering majority. Time and time again, the official reports from European data authorities all say the same thing. It's not the bad guys we should be most worried about, it's good people making simple, honest mistakes.
And that right there leads us to a huge, critical point. You can pour millions into the fanciest firewalls and have the most buttoned-up legal policies on the planet, but if your team isn't on board and aware, you've got a gaping hole in your defenses. At its heart, GDPR isn't a tech problem, it's a people problem.
Okay, so if it's people, what kind of mistakes are we actually talking about here? And look, we're not talking about some disgruntled employee trying to cause chaos. We're talking about the kind of oops moment that could happen to literally anyone on a busy Tuesday afternoon.
And I bet these look pretty familiar. We're not talking about anything complicated here. It's the everyday stuff. It's an email sent to the wrong John Smith because of that darn autocomplete feature. It's that heart-stopping moment you realize the company laptop is still in the back of the cab. Or it's one accidental click on a phishing link that looked just a little too convincing. These are the real-world events that trigger most GDPR incidents.
Let's just pause on that first one, because it is an absolute stunner. The #1 most common reported breach under GDPR is just sending an email to the wrong person. That's it, one little misclick. Wild, right?
And if you're thinking, oh, an email mistake, that can't be a big deal. Well, think again. Because this number, nearly 1 million euros, that's the fine a bank got hit with for exactly that reason. An employee accidentally sent some documents to the wrong recipient. The consequences are very, very real.
You know, the Danish Data Protection Authority just nails it with this quote. This one sentence sums up the entire risk perfectly. One small wrong click can cause an entire security breach.
Okay, I know. That all sounds pretty scary. But here's the thing. This is where the story pivots, because the very same people who represent the biggest risk, they can, and absolutely should, become your most powerful defense. But it takes a complete shift in how you think about it. You have to stop seeing your employees as the weak link in the chain. They are not the problem, they are the solution. So why is that? It's because they're right there, on the front lines, handling data and facing these potential risks every single day. Think of a trained, aware employee as a human firewall. They're the ones who get that gut feeling about a weird email, who might question a strange request for data, and who can stop a mistake before it ever turns into a breach you have to report.
So how do we make that happen? How do you actually turn employees from a potential risk into your best defense? Well, it all comes down to training, but not just any training, an effective, thoughtful program. And luckily, there's a clear roadmap to follow. And let's be crystal clear, this is not just some nice-to-have corporate activity. Regulators, like the ICO in the UK, flat out say that staff training is a fundamental safeguard. Trust me, if a regulator comes knocking after a breach, one of the very first things they're going to ask is, so, tell us about your staff training.
So what does a great program actually look like? Well, it follows these key steps. First off, one size fits all is a disaster. You have to start by looking at your specific risks. Then you tailor the content. What the folks in HR need to know is totally different from the marketing team, right? You make it real with actual case studies, test to make sure it's sinking in, and crucially, you make sure it's not a one-and-done thing. It has to be ongoing.
And that's really the whole point of this. Good training isn't about memorizing rules. It's about changing habits. It's about taking that potential weak link and turning it into the absolute strongest part of your entire data protection chain.
Okay, but training.
as important as it is only one piece of the puzzle. To really truly secure your organization, you've got to think bigger. The ultimate goal is to build an entire culture around privacy.
So what on earth is a privacy culture? It's when protecting data stops being a checkbox on a form and becomes a core value, just like customer service or innovation. It's when considering privacy becomes second nature for everyone, from the newest intern all the way to the CEO.
And when you get this right, the payoff is huge. And it's way more than just dodging fines. Inside the company, you get happier, more empowered employees and way less risk. And on the outside, you build incredible, lasting trust with your customers. In today's world, that's not just compliance, that's a serious competitive advantage.
I love this quote because it just sums it all up perfectly. Look, it has to start at the top. Leadership needs to set the tone and walk the walk. But the culture itself? It comes to life in the small, day-to-day choices that every single person in the organization makes.
So let's wrap this up by coming back to a central question. We know for a fact that human error is the #1 risk, but it absolutely does not have to be that way. The real question for you and your organization isn't, are my people a risk? The real question is, what am I doing to turn them into my strongest defense? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.